Well, if you're an entrepreneur or you're a software developer yourself, you obviously know that there are plenty of programs in the marketplace that are like Minsky right now. Minsky is a dynamic modeling system. It uses the flowchart to turn a set of mathematical equations into a flowchart rendition of a dynamic system. And of course there are programs like Simulink, VisSim, iThink, Stellar, VenSim, and so on that already do this, AnyLogic, so on and so forth. Probably 20 or so programs in the field. Why develop a new one? Well, all those programs, as you'd be aware, use a flowchart analogy. They take up a set of equations, and if you have, for example, as I do in my model, if I have GDP or output divided by labour productivity, I can then say that is equal to the number of workers that are hired and so on through a dynamic system. And I can do that quite easily in VisSim or Stellar or iThink or Simulink and so on. What is very hard to do in those programs, in fact I think it's almost possible to say it's impossible to do, is to model financial transactions. And the reason for that is quite simple. When a financial transaction occurs, it has a source and a sink. There's an account out of which money is created or in which a debt is created, and on the other side, the account to which that money is transferred, or new money created by the act of creating a loan. That means you've got to have the same input on two locations in the diagram. So if you imagine what you'd look like if you started cabling it up, you get quite a bit of spaghetti code coming out of that. And that's only if you're looking in a very, very stylized and very, very basic way at the whole system. Because if you went shopping and decided to buy, for example, a new video camera at the Sony retailer, then when you made that transaction, there would be a transfer of money from your account to Sony. Now that's potentially something which will turn up in one bank. But if it turns up in two banks, if you bank in one place and Sony banks in another, then for that transfer to occur, there has to also be a transfer of funds representing that cash in the central bank between the reserve accounts of those two banks. So that one transaction now turns up 4 times. And the more detailed you get, the more complicated the whole thing becomes. So I gave up on trying to model the system that way. I built a very, very simple model to begin with, working in raw differential equations. And then I finally realised, courtesy of exposure to the work of another non-orthodox economist called Wynne Godley, that a tabular layout would do just as well in developing equations. And now I use a double entry bookkeeping standard so that any entry you make in a table, for example, if you create a new loan, that creates a new deposit. You show the source, which is the loan, as a plus, as an asset on the asset side of the banking ledger. You show the sink, which is a minus, on the liability side of the ledger. The two balance sum to 0, so the program makes sure you've made those two connections. And out of the table, by summing up the symbolic entries in the columns, you generate the set of differential equations. And then you can link that to the physical system as well. So for example, if I'm talking about the amount of wages being paid out to workers, those wages depend upon the amount of output currently going on and the current wage that's determined in the rest of the economy, not just in the financial sector, but in the industrial sector as well, bargaining between workers and employers and so on. So that system meant that I finally had a framework which could enable the modelling of financial transactions. And fundamentally the flaw in economic theory is it's trying to imagine that doesn't happen. Now, I know this is weird for anybody who's not done an economics degree, and those of you who've done engineering and computer science, congratulations on choosing a sensible discipline. But in economic theory, very early on students are taught that money is just an illusion, a veil over barter as they call it. And you'll therefore see people like Paul Krugman, who's won a Nobel Prize in economics and whose views I often find myself agreeing with, whose analysis begins from arguing you don't need to worry about banks and money. Now, he does finally acknowledge the importance of debt, but in a classic debate I had with him earlier this year on the blogosphere, in remarking on my work, he said he's all for including banks in stories where they matter, but why are those so essential to a story about debt and leverage? I found that breathtaking, but at the same time I know that's what the majority of the profession thinks. We need to break them away from that way of thinking. I've pretty much given up hope of changing the old, as you might know from Thomas Kuhn's comment. You don't really make people committed to a particular paradigm like the Maxwellian model become believers in a new one, like Planck and quantum mechanics and energy coming in quanta. You simply have to wait until they pass on. You train the new ones. and they come along and they find it absolutely natural to think in the new framework. So I'm really directing this program at both the established critics like myself, who I hope will grab this with glee and start developing realistic, monetary, dynamic, non-equilibrium models of the economy, and at the young students who I hope will find this a very seductive way to think about the economy, in opposed to the old stylized intersecting supply and demand curves, which is still the mental mindset of conventional economists. So this is what Minsky does. We've got a long way to go. At the moment, courtesy of the grant I got from INET, we currently have a working model that can handle a number of discrete banks and the transactions between them. It can model physical flows, as you'll see from some of the models that'll be running with this video. And it is able at least to do as much as most conventional economists do, with two important extensions. First of all, it includes money, and secondly, it's genuinely dynamic. Now, bizarrely, as I've mentioned, neither of those play any real role in the mainstream economic models. What I want to take it to is being able to model a genuine multi-sectoral model of the economy. I've already done that in mathematical programs. I've done it both in Mathematica and in MathCAD, and I've generated outputs out of those systems that show you can actually model the system and get complex cycles. The ones we actually see in the real world are part of the innate structure of an input-output system with finance. So I've done that. What I want to do is make that beautifully simple in Minsky, to simply turn that bank icon into a multi-dimensional icon, and each slice of that icon represents a different financial sector, and we then have an easy representation of the multi-sectoral nature of the financial system, matched by the same thing happening to the production cycle. Once that's done, each little instance, a single instance of that is a single national economy. But of course there are many national economies. So the next idea is to take it from that level and have you produce a model of the economy that you're satisfied with as a national rendition, and then make multiple instances of that, and then have trade and financial flows between them. And that would then represent the entire global economy. Now, my ambition here is similar in many ways to what Lorenz did with his model of weather and fluid dynamics, starting from that simple three-dimensional model of fluid flow, an XY plane fluid flow under a heat differential. From that, we've grown to the incredibly sophisticated work we know that is commonplace in meteorology these days. I believe Minsky is the foundation that can do the same thing for economics. And I want your help, financial, and if you want to come and code, please. We're doing it open source. I'd like your help. Thank you.